There are moments when you think you're still living in the real world, until the forest answers you with silence. In the next few hours, one man will come face to face with something science has no name for, something people have tried to bury under the label wild bear. But if you've ever seen a human face on the body of a beast, you'll understand. Some legends weren't made to be told. They were made to warn. Hi, I'm Leon Graves, and this is the Inkpath, where I guide you through haunting stories drawn from the shadows of fear and the heart of what it means to be human. If you believe there are truths hidden in what the world refuses to explain, hit subscribe and follow me through the fog, where the line between reality and myth is as thin as morning mist between the trees. Prologue: The Legend in the Woods. On a quiet afternoon in May 1974, Jack Miller, a 39-year-old man with broad shoulders, calloused hands, and eyes heavy with skepticism, stepped silently into the woods of northern Georgia. His home sat more than 2 dusty miles down a red dirt road, completely isolated from the rest of the world. In his hands, a machete and a heavy axe, tools he'd carried for years, like old friends that never left his side. Every time Jack passed through that wild stretch of forest, the slice of his machete through the brush echoed like nature's breath being disturbed. He'd stop occasionally, not because he feared predators, but because he was too familiar with the unnatural silence that soaked this place. Jack was a man of the wild. No phone, no car. He lived in a small wooden cabin, no more than 400 square feet. His nearest neighbor was an hour's hike through thick woods. Friends, about as rare as cell signal in the valley, called him the crazy guy in the woods. They said he was too quiet, too far gone. But Jack knew one thing for sure. Out here, things were still quiet, untamed, and real. The kind of real the outside world had long forgotten. But the forest he lived in wasn't entirely normal. You might hear about it in roadside bars or whispered by an old woman across the valley. Stories of strange, massive creatures, shaped like bears but not quite bears, drifting through the shadows like ghosts looking for souls. They called it the Ghost of the Deep Mountain. Locals, in their old tongue, had another name, Ukamar. But Jack, he called it nonsense. He trusted his axe more than ghost stories. That belief held firm until that very afternoon when he stopped beneath an old oak as wide as 2 men, hugging it side by side, preparing to trim its limbs for firewood. As usual, he placed his machete at the base of the trunk, gripped the axe handle, and paused. About 10 feet above his head were claw marks, not scratches from wind or wild animals. They were deep, cut clean into the heartwood, wider than a man's hand, spaced as if the thing that left them had claws a foot long. Jack raised an eyebrow. Bear? He muttered. But something felt wrong. He'd dealt with black bears, brown bears, even a mountain lion that once nearly took his throat. But never had he seen marks this deep, this precise, this high up. No bear could reach that far, not unless it was bigger than anything he'd ever known. In that moment, something primal stirred inside him. Not quite fear, more like an ancient warning, a whisper from nature itself. He shook his head and sighed. There's no such thing as Ukamar, just a bear. He raised his axe and started to chop, the rhythm of the blade steady, like the beat of a second heart. He had no idea that just hours later, that very axe would be the only thing between him and a darkness without a name, a presence older than any cabin man had ever built in these woods. The sound of the axe echoed through the trees, mixing with the wind, but somewhere along the way, the insects had stopped singing, and from far beyond, just near the claw-marked oak, a breath stirred in the dark, waiting. The echo of a legend, ready to become real. Chapter 2. The Windless Night. He told me, that night, it was like the whole forest stopped breathing. I still remember what my aunt, Martha Simmons, a former nurse at the hospital where Jack Miller was treated after the attack, said to me. When I asked her, Do you think he was hallucinating? She just looked out the window and replied, "You can't fake fear so deep it freezes your blood." Jack trembled in every muscle, and his eyes looked like they were still staring at that thing. It was a calm night, at least at first. The sky had turned dusky as Jack Miller wrapped up his work. The firewood was stacked neatly beside his aging cabin, forming a wall nearly chest-high. Sweat soaked the rim of his faded canvas hat as he climbed the porch steps, wiped his face with the back of his shirt, and stepped inside. The cabin smelled of pine resin and old earth. Jack rummaged through the pantry, looking for something simple for dinner. He finally settled on a half-full pot of rabbit and bean stew from the night before, a staple bush meal for someone living off-grid, and stepped out to the backyard where he kept his wood-burning stove. Jack loved eating outdoors. He'd always said that fresh air, chirping insects, and cool night wind made the best sleeping pills. That evening was no different. He placed the stew on the fire and sat down at a rickety wooden table, waiting quietly for it to boil. At first, the woods were alive, humming, rustling, whispering. Then, everything stopped. No crickets, no owls, no wind, just the soft crackle of the fire. It was like someone had squeezed the forest, pressing all the life out of it. Jack looked up, eyes scanning the shadowy tree line a dozen yards away. Bushes, trunks, darkness. Nothing moved, nothing called out. A chill slid down his spine, not from the air, but from the silence. In the forest, silence can be the loudest sound of all. "That's the signal of a predator," he muttered. His thoughts jumped instantly to the claw marks from earlier, and the low growl he'd dismissed as imagination. His eyes drifted from the table to the cabin door, a thought forming. Maybe it was time to go inside. The unease in his gut dried out his mouth. Best to head in was the smartest thought he'd had all day. He stood up, ready to abandon dinner. But just as his hand touched the doorknob, he froze. His eyes widened. He'd forgotten the stew, still simmering on the stove just a few steps away. Some might say that when your life's in danger, you don't risk it for a pot of food. But in the deep woods, a hot meal is effort. It's survival. It's one of the few luxuries you have. Jack hesitated, weighing instinct against logic, then turned his head. The forest remained unchanged, pitch black and sealed in silence. He stepped off the porch, crossed the table again, and walked slowly toward the fire. No wind, no bugs, not a sound. Then, as he bent down to adjust the air vent beneath the stove, something slammed into his back, so hard it forced the air from his lungs in a strangled gasp. Before he could recover, a massive, fur-covered arm wrapped around his waist, claws like icy steel dragging across his shirt. Jack twisted, kicked, and clawed for escape. He rolled to the ground, scrambling toward the machete he'd left near the fire earlier. When he turned back to face whatever it was, he froze again. Not from fear, from horror. The thing standing in front of him was human-sized, covered in thick fur, shoulders like carved timber. Its claws dug into the ground like it wanted to shred the earth beneath them. But the face was the worst part. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't even an animal. It was a human face, or something pretending to be. With eyes, a nose, lips, dull and gray, grotesque, twisted, like someone had molded a human mask and stretched it over a beast's skull. My Aunt Martha said, Jack told me that in that moment, he didn't think. He didn't speak. He didn't reason. He only knew one thing: run. And so Jack ran. He sprinted past the table, boots pounding the forest floor. He tore across the yard, toward the towering stack of firewood he'd built earlier that day. His brain pumped adrenaline like a fire hose. Behind him, the creature followed, crashing through the darkness like falling timber. Jack heard a whooshing swing and a sickening crack. Something hit the back of his head. He reeled, dizzy. He remembered warm blood spilling over his face and the sharp sting where part of his ear was gone. Still, his legs moved. He climbed. He clawed his way up to the firewood pile, and from there scrambled onto the roof of his cabin with what strength he had left. The wind stayed still. The forest held its breath. And when Jack turned around, the creature was gone, like it had never been there at all. I asked Aunt Martha, "Do you believe him?" She answered without hesitation, eyes glistening.
I saw the claw marks on his back. 7 clean tears like they were made by a straight razor. I saw where his ear had been ripped off, skin and bone torn like someone had peeled it away. But the bite mark. That wasn't from any animal I studied in medical school.
Jack didn't sleep that night. He lay on his rooftop, machete in hand, eyes wide open. Not because he was expecting another attack, but because, from that moment on, he knew. What lived in the woods wasn't a legend. It was real, and it was still out there, hiding somewhere beneath the black canopy of trees. Chapter 3. Something in the Woods.
Jack didn't scream, didn't call for help. He just gasped like a deer frozen in the stare of a predator. His body wasn't reacting from thought anymore. It was pure instinct, and that's when I knew. He had seen something no human should ever see.
That's from Patrick Cross, the only neighbor Jack Miller had, living miles away through thick woods. When I interviewed him last fall, he turned on just a dim porch light, poured a slow glass of whiskey, and told me that part, voice shaky, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the trees. In that moment, as Jack bent down to turn off the wood fire stove and lift his pot of stew, everything was still within the borders of the human world. But only seconds later, that line was violently shattered. Something massive, brutal, and wild slammed into his back, like an entire tree collapsing onto him. The air burst from his lungs, vision blurred. Before Jack could process what happened, he felt it, a suffocating grip, like a nightmare taking physical form. A thick, black-furred arm wrapping around his torso, rough as burnt rope. Below, razor claws sliced across his belly like it was prey waiting to be gutted. He staggered, throwing an elbow, stumbling as if caught in a storm. In the chaos, his hand caught the machete he'd left near the stove, a habit of any woodsman. Never stray far from your weapon. In that split second, Jack's survival instinct surged, even though his body was still trying to regain its footing. He spun around. His instincts had prepared him to see a bear. But what he saw wasn't any bear in any book or on any TV show. Not a lion, not a wolf, not even one of those cryptids from campfire tales. The thing was upright, covered in tangled coal-black hair, shoulders as wide as old tree trunks, arms rippling with power, its chest heaved like a broken accordion. But what truly haunted Jack, what made him forget to swing the machete, was its face. A face. Human, number, not quite human, but something that was trying to be. Something wrong. At a glance, it looked like a cheap rubber mask, but up close, the skin was pulled tight over sharp cheekbones. Its jaw jutted forward, with fangs nearly curling past its lips. Eyes black, no whites. Lips ashen gray, quivering like it was trying to speak. A language that didn't belong to mankind. Even now, when he tells that part, he shakes like he's been electrocuted, Jack's sister, Ellen Winchester, told me during a view at the nursing home where she now lives. He said his brain just shut off when he saw it. No logic, no thoughts. Just one command. Run. And so Jack ran. His legs, hardened by years in the wild, launched him toward the cabin. Wood cracked, leaves tore, dry grass crunched beneath his boots. Every sense lit up. As he neared the woodpile, it was like his body shifted into survival autopilot, climbing with raw, animal strength, each step a leap toward life itself. Behind him, the creature didn't howl, it didn't roar. It chased him in silence, terrifyingly fast. No panting, no growl, just the heavy thud of flesh slapping against the forest floor. Jack barely grabbed the edge of the cabin roof when something invisible smashed into the side of his head. No claws, no hand, just pain. A deafening blow that made his right ear explode in agony. A shockwave through his skull. Blood flooded his eyes almost instantly. And still he climbed, scrambled, crawled onto the roof, vision failing, his right ear now dangling like torn cloth. He looked back. Nothing was there. No stove, no table, no woodpile, no creature. Just stillness. Crushing, eerie stillness.
I was the first to treat Jack's injuries in the ER. There was a deep gash running from his right jawline to the back of his skull, but that wasn't the worst part. Along the edge of the wound was a bite mark. Not circular like a dog's, not shredded like a bear's. It looked human. 32 teeth perfectly aligned.
That night, Jack didn't sleep. He just lay there, still on the freezing rooftop, a deep gash torn across his ear, and in his eyes a forest darker than he had ever known. He had no more doubts, no more excuses. That thing was real. It had a human face, and it knew exactly where he lived. In the next episode, as the sun rises, Jack is taken to the hospital. But what truly terrified the doctors wasn't the physical wounds, it was the bite mark they found, and the statement that even the sheriff refused to put on record. Part 2 drops this Friday. Don't look away from what's still waiting in the woods. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, you now know more than most people ever will about what happened in that break room. But the story isn't over. There's still the basement, the notebooks, and the one question no one can answer. Why? Subscribe to the Inkpath if you haven't already, and don't miss what comes next. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday. I'm Leon Graves. I'll see you in the next one.